in the room already, a few more possibly coming in. I just wanted to say a couple of things up front before we get started. Let you know that attendees, as attendees, you don't have microphone or camera access during this particular online event. Your voices, likenesses, and images will not be captured by Barnard College. Any written submission of questions may be shared during the Q&A portion of the event. And again, before we get started, I'd be remiss not to mention the racial and political unrest that is taking place in the United States and around the world as we speak here today. Systemic racism and violence against people of color, particularly Black Americans, is not a new phenomenon, but especially in the context of the global pandemic, these inequities are magnified, brought to the forefront for everyone to face. The Barnard community is dedicated to tackling these issues, and we're here to lift each other up in difficult times. We are continuing with alumni events and programs like this one, as we believe it's meaningful to the community to provide a platform for alumni to connect, to engage, and to learn from the college and each other. So speaking of difficult times and speaking of learning from the college and each other, let's get started on today's presentation. So I'm going to just take a second to share my screen. Great, so we're kicking off today here an 8-part series on looking for jobs, conducting a job search in difficult times. And this is the first week of Beyond Barnard Summer Colloquium, which is a series of over 70 programs over the next 8 weeks that we're doing for students, alumni, and some for students and alumni. So really excited. It's been an exciting week, and I'm really excited to kick off this session where we'll talk about planning and executing a successful job search in sort of a broad context, and then get into some details today and then further details as the series goes along. You are welcome to drop in and drop out of the 8 topics as we go. So you might be interested in some more than others. And the detailed list of each session is on the events page. If you click on that in the original invite you got from Alumni Relations, you can see what's coming up, and I'll also talk a little bit about that at the end. I'm Christine Valenza Shin. I graduated from Barnard in '84, and I am the Senior Associate Director for our Advising and Programs team at Beyond Barnard. Beyond Barnard, some of you may be familiar with more than others, and some of you may remember one core of what we do as either Barnard Career Development or Barnard Career Services when you were here as a student. Beyond Barnard came into being in the first year of Sion Beilock's presidency. It was a vision she had for a career center that also brought under the same umbrella graduate school advising, fellowship advising, 4+1 pathways for undergraduates to earn a BA and an MA in 5 years, as well as our existing employer relations and student jobs. So it's a one-stop shop. We're a team of 16, and Advising and Programs is my team, and what we do is exactly what it says. We advise one-on-one, and we also conduct programs, one of which is here today. So, as I mentioned, this is part of Summer Colloquium. We've put together much more programming than we normally do in a summer because this is nowhere near a normal summer. Both students and recent graduates and alumni are experiencing the impact of the pandemic, the challenges to institutional racism, the impact on the economy, and so we've put together this programming to meet the need of, try and meet the needs of what everybody's, some parts of what people are experiencing this summer. And we're going to look at a couple things today in terms of our job search. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I think, in general, job searching in a recession, and particularly in this recession that's just beginning to take shape. We're going to talk a little bit about exploring options and clarifying goals. And then we'll look at what you need to have ready for your job search. And then I'm going to give you a framework. It's not the only framework, but it's a framework we found useful for how do you go about this process of searching for a job in a logical and comprehensive way. How can you keep track of everything? And then importantly, keeping it in perspective and making it manageable. So that's our plan. Before we dive in, we'll take a moment to remember that it is summer. This is a slide I stole from my boss, AJ Ehrenstein, one of the two deans who leads Beyond Barnard. And this is sort of our mental health reminder. It could be the dog, it could be the beach, it could be just being out in nature. It could simply be looking at silly pictures or looking at pictures of nature, which have been shown to be calming and relaxing. But it's a reminder that in the midst of everything that's going on, whether it's a job search or just the general pressures we're all under, that we hope you're taking time for mental health breaks, mental health support, and keeping things in balance as best as anybody can during this difficult time. And speaking of difficult times, let's talk a little bit about the COVID economy. We've got the bad news that you're all familiar with. Different facets of the pandemic, the impact, the uneven impact it's having across the board, the flaws it's revealing, and then perhaps the worst news on the slide, that Jeopardy has run out of original programming, and I'm sure they're the first of many, and they're going to reruns. So lots of different impacts, lots of bad news, lots of confusion over how long this will last, where it's impacting. But we wanted to share some observations, not necessarily on the positive side, but in terms of on the ground, anecdotally, what are we hearing, what are we seeing here at Beyond Barnard, where our job is to help support students and recent grads and alumni in general on their pathways, careers, and otherwise. So just starting with the class of 2020, many of you have expressed concern about what's going on with our recent seniors and new graduates. We do a first destination survey every year, and it starts the day of graduation and continues through November. So in a class of 700 plus, we've heard back from 260 so far, and we'll continue to send that out and continue to add to the numbers. So at the moment, it's looking not that hugely different from summer 2019, which surprised us. Now, there definitely is a little bit of a skew here. We do every year tend to hear first from people whose plans are set, who have already started a job or are soon starting a job, or their graduate school plans are set. And then as the 6 months unfold, we tend to hear from more of the respondents. So there could be a little bit of a statistical skew there, but we did find it reassuring that it's not looking drastically different from what it was a year ago. And delays to start dates on some of the early job offers that students got, some of the industries that do make their offers in fall and winter. There are some delays happening, but we haven't seen a huge difference from other years. So we find that somewhat reassuring, but yes, we are continuing to work really closely with our class of 2020, some of whom might be on this webinar, to support them. We've got mission job groups going to help keep them supported and accountable as they continue looking for their first opportunity out of college. In general, college graduates, some recent data that came out from Forbes, are 8% less likely to be unemployed because of COVID. It's, COVID has hit, and the COVID economy has hit unevenly in terms of demographics, in terms of different industries. But as college graduates, we all hopefully have a little bit of an edge on a personal basis here. And then just, longer term, I started my work as a career advisor after working in education and higher education in 2008, 2009. So I sort of learned how to career advise in the last recession, have watched things get better, and then watched things get really bad again very quickly. And so can speak from experience from talking to so many of you over the years that job searches during recessions and in certain industries take longer, but that many industries are still posting jobs and there are still opportunities out there. So a couple of other key points. This is a tough year. It's a tough year for many of you in terms of employment and your particular situation, but no single year is going to define your entire career trajectory. There's definitely data out there that shows that graduating into a recession, experiencing a recession early in your career can have long-term negative impact on your salary. And we will be doing a session later in the summer about salary negotiation in general and giving you a skill set to help counter some of that. But in terms of COVID COVID-19, anybody who has a gap on their resume or couple of part-time jobs they put together, or jobs even that maybe look a little bit different from the rest of their career path, all of that's going to be easily understood, easily put into your narrative in terms of, 2020, everyone's going to, I know in the last recession, there was always a lot of concern and there was a lot of press about, oh, if you have even a gap of a couple months, people are going to ask you about that. And I really don't see that happening under these particular very dramatic circumstances. And while we're all focused on ourselves and our particular situations, trying to navigate them, whether that's employment or otherwise, you do, and I know I hear this in everyday conversation, you do want to remind yourself, situate yourself in the broader community around the country, around the world that's facing this particular situation, and a lot of challenges and some opportunities. And be asking, as I know many of you already are, how can you support your communities in this time of exceptional strain? And that community includes people you work with, people you used to work with. We can look at it through the sort of career communities opportunity, as well as, of course, the alumni community that you're all part of. And one thing we always throw in, whatever specific topic we're talking about in the job search, we always want to take that time out, be it 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, 5 months, to do a little reflection and transition. So with that, let's go into our next agenda topic, which is exploring options, clarifying goals. I did a session during reunion that some of you might have attended on career exploration. It's been archived and you can find it on the alumni reunion page. On career exploration, I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time here, but wanted to talk about the fact that whether you are looking by choice for something, or have been laid off, furloughed, or otherwise are unemployed, not by choice, we always want you to take a second to pause to think about what it is you want to do next. And the process that we usually look at is first looking inward, some of these key questions. I particularly love this concept of motivated and burnout skills. Motivated skills are those things that you're good at and you enjoy doing. They give you energy. You want a lot of your day to be filled with them. Burnout skills are things that you might be good at, but you don't particularly enjoy. And there's a fair amount of research, anecdotal and otherwise, that women in particular tend to, at work, when they're good at something, often will get assigned more of that and keep taking that on. And it definitely can lead to burnout. It's good to be competent at something, but it's tough to be handed a lot of stuff that you don't particularly enjoy doing. So whether it's looking at your skills, your values, it's this inward look. Just simple. I think in almost every one-on-one session I do at some point with anybody who's looking for a job or considering a change is that simple question of, tell me about your last job. What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? That simple pro-con process is really valuable. We have formal assessment tools through our office, including the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator Career Report, the Strong Interest Inventory that measures interest and motivation, and then, as mentioned above, values and skill sorts. And then once you're done, once you've taken some time to look inward, it's looking outward. And here's just a couple of resources. ONET's a federal government resource that's got lots of information about jobs. Career Zone pops up in a lot of states. If you type the name of your state and career zone, you'll find it. Or if you just type in career resources and the name of your state, most state governments have some information. And then I put job sites there because even if you're not ready to start applying to things, job sites are a really great research source for what's out there. What's, how are jobs being described? What skills are employers looking for? So that can be a really valuable research position as well. And then we'll talk a little bit about networking today and then later in the summer, but informational networking, really, talking to people who are doing what you'd like to be doing or working where you'd like to be working could be really helpful. And then once you've looked inward and then looked outward, then it's that process of, what are my next steps? What are my goals? And how do we make it real? Looking at timing, finances, and strategies. Okay. So now let's talk about preparing your job search toolbox. What do you need to have gathered together to get started on this? So here's what's in your toolbox. You've got the first two items, resume, LinkedIn profile, cover letters, are going to be covered in detail in later sessions in this series. But today I'm going to look a little bit more closely at the 30-second networking pitch and the professional references. And then we'll touch on the support network at the end. So these are the things we want you to gather together either before your job search, or if you're already in the middle of your job search, take a few moments, check down this list, see if you're good with all of these things, maybe add a couple things you might be missing. Okay. The 30-second pitch, sometimes known as the elevator pitch, it comes in different formats. Basic structure, it's you introducing yourself in one form or another. So it's who are you, what do you do, what are you looking for? When we did our session during reunion, I had everybody actually get into groups and make your declaration of intent. And I think that's an important thing, is saying this out loud, or writing it down, sharing it, saying out loud, here's who I am, here's what I'm currently doing or most recently did, here's what I want next, is really helpful. It also, a written version of this you can use on LinkedIn if you're reaching out and connecting to people. If you're at a networking event, most of which are taking place online these days, and sort of or even in an informal networking at a social situation, this could be used. And then a longer version of this, you could expand on this question: what do you do? What are you looking for? As the answer to an initial interview question, the classic, tell us about yourself, or, other sort of general questions that are often the kickoff for an interview. Okay. So actually, let's go back for a second. Let's take a moment to let you do this. Write down or think a very brief version of who are you, what do you do, what are you looking for? So what brought you to this particular session? So, and actually I'm realizing, looking at my notes, that I forgot to have Lacey, supporting me from Alumni Relations, launch our poll. So let's do that. We've got a 2-question poll that'll give me a little information about who's on the call, what your status is. And then in the chat function, if you choose to, take a second to introduce yourself. You can use initials, first name only, whatever you're comfortable with. But tell us that. Who are you? What are you currently or most recently doing? And what are you looking for? If you choose to just leave that on your own and write that down, that's fine as well. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute, let you all do those things, answer the poll, and then write your a very brief 30-second pitch if you want. When I was writing this poll a couple days ago, it's actually difficult to take into account all of the different categories, which is why I threw in the handy other, because it's hard to cover all eventualities. All right, so this is good information. So we've got, at the moment, 25%, a quarter of you are employed full-time, 14% employed part-time, 38% unemployed. Not surprising that would be the largest group of people participating in a webinar on how to find a job. Some furloughed folks. I myself am furloughed, along with many staff at Barnard, but just partially, and I'm on a 20% furlough. got a couple of retired folks in the audience, which is awesome, and other. And then current job seeking status. Again, not surprising that our largest group is actively seeking, and then some are planning, and 30%, so 52% actively, 30% planning to, and 17% just thinking ahead or considering options. Great, okay, so let's end the poll. And then I just wanna bring up it's actually hard for me to see the chat thing when I'm in screen sharing mode. So I think I'm gonna go, in the interest of time, I'm gonna go ahead, but at the end when we look at questions, I'd love to take a look at what some of you wrote for your sort of declaration of who you are, what you're currently doing, and what you're looking for next. So, great. Okay, so back on the 30-second pitch, just a couple of points about this. Sorry, there we go. That's where I want to be. I guess I'll start with that second bullet point, which is 30-second pitches most often occur in conversation. Sometimes when we work on this with students, they get all nervous about memorizing a speech, and I point out, it's very rare you're going to just walk up to somebody and say all three things at once. It's more likely going to be you introduce yourself and somebody says, oh, what do you do? And you say that, and then, oh, what are you, especially students, what are you planning on doing next? So it's more of a dialogue, but sometimes in some circumstances, for, as mentioned before, if you're reaching out to someone on LinkedIn or you're introducing somebody at a professional event or a networking event, you might end up giving this little sort of speech. And so you can practice it. It's much easier nowadays to record things if you've got a smartphone, and you keep working on this, and you're going to revise it as you get along, as you go along. Okay. Sorry, the poll is kind of up and distracting. So let me make it disappear from my screen. Excellent. Okay, good. All right, sorry. Good, okay. So then we also wanted to look in our toolkit. I want to do a little bit of focus here on professional references. A lot of questions come up at this point. So I just want to make that distinction between professional references. These are people you choose and you share their contact information when asked during the job search process. And you are trying to choose people who are going to speak honestly but positively. Generally, it's not that they have to say 100% good things about you, but you're trying to avoid people who are going to, that are going to say negative things about you. So the professional references are who you choose in the job seeking process, interview process. And it's not the same as listing your complete employment history, which sometimes you're required to do up front and often required to do sort of later in the process when they're getting closer to make a decision. So, and so general best practice is, to think about who would be good references for you, and reach out to them as you start your job search and check if they're willing to be a reference. There's no magic number, but 3 is a decent amount to aim for. And you want to, especially if it's someone you haven't talked to in a while, you want to confirm, where are they at? Have they had a promotion, gone somewhere else? And do they want to be contacted at work or contacted, privately? And then you'll be asked for these at a particular point in the process. We'll talk about that on the next slide. But you want to gather this information together, have it ready to go before you start full on applying to things. Or if you haven't done that already, like I said, if you're already in the middle of looking for jobs but haven't had a chance to do this yet, this is a good time to take a little time to do that. So in the old days, you used to not provide references until things got very close to the end, but nowadays with the online application system, sometimes references are asked for up front. It's not so much, it's actually quite rare for them to reach out to references early in the process before they've even decided who they're going to interview, but in general, it's an HR practice that allows them to have all the information about you at their fingertips from the beginning, so that if they do get to the checking references part, that they'll have it ready there. Once you have been asked, it's great to let your references know. Now, again, if you're being asked, if you're getting into job seeking systems with, where you're filling out an online form and you're asked for them over and over. You don't have to write every single time. You could just give them the heads up that, hey, I've applied for a couple of things recently where they asked for your name in advance, haven't been asked for an interview yet, but just letting you know. And then it's always good practice once your job search is complete to circle back and thank your references just let them know, what the end result was. So one particular thing that started to arise in the last recession, I have sort of a list of bad hiring practices, bad management practices that sort of took hold during the last recession, and which kind of coincided with the digitalization of this whole job search process. And one of the bad behaviors, not too common, but I heard about it a lot from various alumni, where they would ask, even if you hadn't listed your current manager, they would ask for that contact information during the interview process. And I, noted in yellow here, to handle with care, because, oftentimes, and I'd say especially in this difficult situation where, for instance, some of you are furloughed, you're not necessarily telling people, even if they might be assuming that you're actively looking for something. So even if you have a great manager who's going to say good things about you, you might not be willing to share that information. So, one thing I've sort of strategized with advisees on is to basically say, I'm going to be happy to share my information with you if you make me a provisional offer, or if we're down to the final round, then happy to share that. But in the meantime, they don't necessarily know I'm looking, and so I'd like you to stick with the references I provided. Former managers are fair game. I mentioned colleagues, and if you are yourself have been a manager or in a middle or upper management position, people you supervise can also be a good professional reference as well. So, okay, so now back to our agenda. Now there's this, how do you actually launch this or get going? Or, as I keep saying, if you're already in the middle of this, how can you organize it in a way that could be helpful to you? And so here, the key distinction we make, and we've sort of been approaching job searches like this for a while at Beyond Barnard, is to think of it in terms of the open market and the hidden market. And they definitely overlap and sort of feed into each other. But one of the things that arose again in the last recession was this idea that somehow you'll never get a job through the open market, that applying to jobs online, or even by sending an email with a resume and cover letter attached, somehow was sending things, hold on one second, it's my daily spam call on my landline, that somehow applying online, this whole digitalized version was a black hole into which you were sending your resume and cover letter, and you'd never get a job that way. And yes, it is definitely challenging. The open market is competitive, and especially during times when lots of people are seeking jobs, but there are best practices, and which we're going to be talking about all through this series. And there are ways to be more effective and to get into that small pile. Once they've sifted through that big pile or scrolled through the many applications, how can you get yourself, your resume out of that first reading and into the one for more in-depth consideration? But you absolutely can't forget about the hidden market, which is jobs that aren't public facing. They're not posted, or they haven't yet been posted because somebody's going to quit, or somebody's going to go on leave, or a grant is going to come through, or a new business facet is going to be added, and suddenly these jobs are going to pop up. And the hidden market has always been accessed by networking. It's been going on for years, but it's particularly important during tough to find jobs times. And the basic idea of networking and sort of exploring the hidden market is that when one of these jobs arises, you want to be fresh in the mind of your contacts. So we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into what this means, open market and hidden market. So the open market basically is public-facing information about a company and the jobs that are available. So I mentioned Barnard Handshake right at the top. Handshake is our platform for making appointments, looking for jobs, looking for events. This particular event, some of you signed up through Handshake. Most of you signed up through the Alumni Relations Portal because we were sort of jointly doing it. But there are postings. They do skew towards current and recently graduated students, but there are postings for what we call experienced hires, people who are a little further down the road in their career. So definitely worth taking a look at as an alumni, as an alum, especially recent, but even if not. Handshake is a general site in the sense that it's, it's not particular to any industry. We have a wide range of industries that are posting there. And that first category, you should be familiar with most of these general job sites. So, they're not specific. And so the filtering becomes very important, and the logarithm. So when you go to an Indeed or a LinkedIn, you want to, set your filters, play around with them so that you are getting jobs that you're interested in, whether you get it in the sort of daily or weekly email or just when you come on and they say, hey, you might be interested in this job. Keep tweaking it. You don't have to be on all 4. You should be on 1 or 2 that seem to work well for you and are producing you, sort of feeding you jobs that you are interested in applying to. And then there's a whole world of niche sites or industry specific sites. I just mentioned 3 here, but there's a lot of them. And actually we had a student worker over the spring work on compiling a nice searchable spreadsheet of different niche sites, which we are currently editing and we're hoping to get up on our resources soon. So we'll keep you posted on that as the series goes by. I'll send you some links. And then, looking directly on company sites at their postings, you don't want to go crazy with this. It's good to have a working list of companies or organizations that you're particularly interested in. And following them on social media can be very helpful, not only to get a general sense of what's going on there, but also job postings and opportunities can be put out directly over social media. And then down at the end, mention some other possible resources that you may or may not have thought of. A lot of you might belong to professional associations or have gone to conferences, and there can be opportunities through there. Job fairs, as I've mentioned, are going to primarily be online at this point, but they're out there. Might be worth taking a look if you subscribe to any trade journals. And then good old-fashioned listservs, which is kind of an old technology, but it still survives in a lot of industries, which is sort of like a closed email circuit, and they can be really helpful. And in some industries, including like the production side of entertainment and things like that, it's actually a pretty common way of finding out about opportunities and applying for them. So all places to look. All right. And how do you strengthen your application on this open market? Customizing is key. That's what we're going to focus on next week and the following week. But quality over quantity and quality over speed. So yes, it's great to apply in that first wave after a job is posted. Doesn't mean you can't post it. You can apply to something that's been up for a week or a month. It is generally speaking, the sooner you get your application in, the better your chance of being in that first group that they take a look at. But quality is important. So if applying in 2 days after you see the job as opposed to 1 day means that you've taken the extra time to customize your cover letter, your resume, and to really do a quality job on that, that's going to have a much greater impact. You don't want to just rush out a bunch of generic resumes and cover letters because you're going to be overlooked. So definitely find that balance between taking the time to put in a quality application versus being timely. And then where the networking side of this comes in is depending on your timing and how quickly people get back to you, it is possible to network in the moment. It's not ideal. Ideally, you will have laid these developed some of these networking relationships ahead of time. But even if you haven't, if a job pops up that you're interested in, you can always take a quick look on LinkedIn, see if you have connections working there or people who know people who are working there who could perhaps make a reference for you. Again, you don't directly ask for someone you don't know to refer you or recommend you for something, but if you can get a quick conversation to hear about, what they have to say about the company, and then potentially for you to ask any, if you haven't applied yet, you could ask for some advice on what you might want to emphasize. If you have already applied, they may offer to refer you, or you could ask them to refer you. Sometimes you'll say yes, sometimes you'll say no. In our previous thriving, pretty much, our strong hiring economy that was just 3 or 4 months ago, there were actually a number of companies and organizations incentivizing referrals by giving people bonuses if somebody they referred got hired and stayed at least 6 months, and then even less, sort of more informally. So a little tougher now, but again, even in a tough hiring climate, hiring managers do want to know that they're looking at good people, and so that personal referral can definitely help. And then just a big print version. Only applying for jobs on websites will not get it done in a recession, or ever really, but it's particularly hard. So, an additional plug for, for the importance of the hidden market using your networking. And we are going to be talking about networking more thoroughly in a later session, but I did just want to mention a couple things here at the start of the series about thinking about who's in this network. So it's obviously professional, and then we of course are very big on using your alumni network, and the Barnard Alumni Network is a strong one. But don't forget high school, don't forget graduate school, but your Barnard alumni, Columbia alumni connections can be very strong. But again, it's also professional associations. You might belong to LinkedIn groups. And then just a reminder that LinkedIn, what's considered your LinkedIn network is not just the people you're directly connected to, but the people they're connected to, that second degree. And that can be very powerful in terms of opening up, larger numbers of people who might be, working where you'd be interested. And then don't forget the personal network of friends and family. You don't have to stick just to your career, your field, anybody you know or meet could be connected to, other people, and that's where the power sort of lies. So just a couple things about reaching out. I won't go over this in great detail, but it's often a two-step process. You don't need to tell everybody everything in the first message. And each step of the way, you want to make it easy for people to say yes. So it's relatively easy for people to either say yes to a connection request or to send you a message back. And then if all you're asking them for is advice or a quick conversation, that's also relatively easy for them to say yes to. And then I often get asked this question. In general, you don't want to just blast your resume out there to a group of people, or even necessarily attach your resume when you're first emailing someone. Again, it's kind of on this theory. You don't want to give them the opportunity to say no before they've spoken to you. So sometimes when someone looks at you just on paper, they're going to say, oh, well, that doesn't make sense, or that's not right for us, or she's not the right level. And so you want to avoid that by asking for the conversation. And then they may say, hey, send me a copy of your resume ahead of time, or send me a copy of your resume after we talk, and that's fine. Have that ready to go. But don't send it proactively, because it can sometimes lead to people sort of pigeonholing you in a way that you don't want to be. What are you trying to get out of this? All of these things are good. It would be lovely if everybody you networked with had a specific job lead or could send you to one, but it's unusual, and especially in a tight market, that's not going to happen a lot. But the information you can gather and the further ideas of other people, other organizations are what's powerful. And then also, of course, by having this sort of intelligent, strategic conversation, you've laid the groundwork for if something does come up, they will, you can connect back to them, they can reach back out to you. So. Okay. And we've been saying this a lot. This popped up in a webinar that some alumni who work at LinkedIn did for us for students this spring. It didn't come from them, but they quoted it, and we like it. If you go in headed asking for the job, generally people don't have jobs at their fingertips, and so you're going to get a lot of advice. But if you establish that relationship by asking for advice, by having an intelligent conversation about what you're looking for and what the person you're talking to does, then that can very often lead to a stronger referral and possibly a job down the road. Okay, back to our agenda. We're zooming through a couple of words on tracking your progress. Okay. When you are in the midst of applying to a lot of different things, you just want to come up with some sort of system. And I always, in meeting with alumni and students over the years, there's different types of people. There's, on the one end, your super organized people who love all these things I mentioned and color code them. And then on the other extreme are people who are, not really into systems, not being super organized, but work with yourself. You need some sort of system to keep track of who you've spoken to and their contact information and when you applied and when the deadline was. So work with your own style to be as organized as you love to be, or as organized as you can make yourself be, so that what you're trying to avoid is that situation where you get a phone call or an email from somebody that you applied to something a month ago and you're like, wait, what was that job? What was the job description? So you want to, have that information. And sort of keep track of your progress. And then in general, using routines and checklists, trying to break this down. I get a lot of questions about, how many jobs should I be applying to? How many hours should I be doing this? And the numbers, oops, I forgot to take out the number. It's more important that you have a routine and that you have this sort of checklist of things that you can be doing regularly, both on the open market and on the hidden market. So I just put up some suggestions here. Certainly part of your activity, even a big part of your activity, is going to be locating jobs you want to apply to and getting, customizing that resume, cover letter, sending off that information. But I tried to spell out some of the key things you can be doing on LinkedIn on a regular basis to research and to build your network, and to look at some of these other sources. Okay. And finally, a few words before we end on keeping perspective and making it manageable. And this slide's really sort of about time management and a little bit about what I was talking about, being organized. Work with yourself, not against yourself. This isn't a time, I don't think this is a time in general, and it's been such a difficult few months for everybody. It's not a time to be trying to majorly reform yourself or become a whole new person. I mean, if you can be and you want to be and you've got things to improve, I'm not trying to stop you from doing that. But when it comes to searching for a job, try and work with your sort of natural rhythms, natural strengths. Answer these questions for yourself. It's particularly challenging for those of you who are currently employed, to fit in a lot of people working from home, a lot of people with family obligations. It can be particularly difficult to sort of set aside the time and energy for job search. So it's even more important to, break it into smaller portions and get to it regularly. And then for those of you who have found yourself unemployed or underemployed, and feeling a little unstructured, think about how can you set things up that sort of work. So I often give the example, I worked part-time for a number of years, and one of the things I would do that I found worked well for me, I would try and schedule something, whatever it was, a work meeting or a dentist appointment or a lunch, for late morning, early afternoon. And what I found was having that sort of time limit in the morning got me up and productive and sort of working on stuff I needed to be working on. And then I had the appointment I needed to get, back in those days, up and out for, and then would have another chunk of time, in the afternoon to get things done. So, think about how you can structure some things. And these aren't all work-related things. It could be your yoga class or your online socializing, but just think about how can you structure it to sort of best manage your time and be productive. You want to be nice to yourself. If you're not already being kind during this very, very difficult time, I'll just, from where I'm sitting, it's not big news, but looking for work, it's really hard. And I like to describe it as a really crappy part-time job. Emphasis on the part-time, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it's tough. This is a lot of very tedious work. And I think especially now that last bullet resonates. It's really easy to feel alone, feel isolated. Even those of us who are working, we feel cut off from our colleagues if you're working remotely. and in general, you know, I know we're starting to come out of the extreme isolation in some ways, although that's very fraught as well. So yeah, it's just not a lot of fun. And so be kind to yourself, recognize that, and help yourself cope with it. And definitely keep it part-time. You absolutely cannot be doing this 9 to 5 or 24/7. It's just too hard. You're going to burn out, and it's going to make it really hard to stay enthusiastic. And especially when you hit the interviewing stage, you know, you want to have some energy and motivation. Definitely balance other activities, whether that's you know, outside, or, you know, whether that's like sort of personal activities and socializing, but also a variety of activities in terms of, you know, mix things up. Don't always be doing the same thing every day, all day, every day. And yeah, and I think I already mentioned this last point, routine. Routine is as important as the actual time spent. There's no minimum requirement. You just want to get in the routine of doing things. I did want to make a note that quite a few people, when they're looking at a job transition, whether it's a promotion within their own field or a side move or a complete career transition, and a lot of people at this point, you know, under the, you know, during this odd time, are looking at how to build their skills. So I just wanted to mention a couple of resources that you may or may not have been aware of. So we've got LinkedIn Learning, used to be called lynda.com. So LinkedIn Learning, the Coursera, edX, I think the one that's not, yeah, Udemy is not showing up, Udacity. These are all online resources for finding online courses. Some of them are MOOCs, massive open online courses that are free or inexpensive. Others charge a fee. General Assembly and Metis are two examples of what, they kind of started out as boot camps for General Assembly for coding and Metis for data analysis. General Assembly has sort of broadened its offerings, not only schedule-wise, but skill-wise. So take a look at things like that if you're looking to brush up particular kinds of skills. And then some of the resources at Barnard, the Computational Science Center, ourselves, and the Empirical Reasoning Center have free online resources. Empirical Reasoning Center, for example, has a lot of free online tutorials for data and data analysis, and even just the basics of using Excel. So check those out for some free and or inexpensive options to keep building those skills. And my personal favorite is, you know, if you're trying to figure out how to do something or remember how to do something, the beauty of YouTube is it's free, and you can also hit rewind as many times. Nobody ever has to know how long it took you to figure out how to, you know, do something on Excel or any other type of thing. Okay. All right, I'm a little conscious of time. I just want to wrap up a couple of things. We're looking for that balance between positive. I say this a lot to people individually. You want to just look at who you're reaching out to at this time in terms of your support system. You're looking for people that are honest but constructive. You know, it's hard to have people who are feeling very negative, you know, and sort of emphasize the negative. The current time and all recessions, you need to be flexible, you need to be patient. And I think one of the things I say the most to people individually and in groups is being confident, though. It's hard to feel this sometimes, but it's getting out of that mindset of like, who can I get to hire me, you know, and that extreme pressure some of you are feeling to immediately get a new job. But trying at least some of the time, and definitely as you're writing a cover letter, definitely as you're entering an interview, is your mindset has to be, who gets me? You know, who gets to have my skills and experience? Not in an arrogant way, but in a confident way. You have skills, you have experience, you have a lot to offer, and you need to remind yourself of that. Even if you don't feel that all the time, you need to be feeling that during your more performative moments in the job search process. But definitely realistic. I've tried to be realistic throughout this about the current challenges. If it's not working, if you are not getting interviews from your applications or your networking, or if you're not getting offers after interviews, you're going to have to reassess, and we are here for that. You know, sometimes it's going to take some harder work, some more original ideas, different strategies. So just giving you a few next steps you can take before I take some questions. So the upcoming topics. are listed here. You see it sort of goes soup to nuts, starting with job documents and then moving into networking, and then hopefully you will have use of our interviewing strategies. You'll get offers to negotiate. We'll give you some preparation for that. And then the final session is sort of looking at, once you do get that job, once you're settled in a new job, how can you be looking ahead to how else you want to develop and continue. You definitely, at any point during the series, now or later, make an advising appointment. And I see that I left off that bullet. I will, after the session, I'll send you some links, one of which will be to Handshake, which is our platform for making an appointment, and also our email address, which is beyondbarnard@barnard.edu, so that you can reach out if you want to try and schedule an appointment. Great. So that brings us to the end of today. I hope that gave you some tips and some framework for approaching the job search in general. And I'm happy to take questions. Let me stop sharing so I can see what people are saying. Oh, great. Lots of you in the chat. Excellent. Lots of you shared a lot of good things in the chat. We will, Lacey or I will do a little cut and paste on that to make sure we can take a look at that later. But I'm glad some of you took the time. It looks like some of you shared some resources and also introduced yourselves and sort of practiced writing out loud, as they say. But let's take a look at some direct questions that there might be. Oh, somebody asked a specific question. I didn't clarify that. Back on the, when we were talking about the first destination survey with our current class. So N equals 260 means we've gotten 260 surveys back so far. And as I mentioned, the class is over 700, so that's not nearly everybody yet, but it's actually on pace with our usual return rate. And as I said, we keep asking the graduated seniors throughout the year to let us know where they end up. So, and then for those of you who are 5 years out, we've also been doing a 5-year out survey. So if you are, what would that be, class of 2015, you should be later in the summer getting a 5-year survey, and we would love to hear from you. The more data and information we can get, both individually and in the aggregate of what's going on out there, the more helpful we can be to all alumni and all students. So somebody's asking about the paid membership levels at LinkedIn. Are they worth it? Generally, no. Most of the things that, well, a qualified no. Most of the things the paid memberships allow you to do on LinkedIn are to reach out to people sort of further away from you in the chain. So instead of, they allow you to sort of reach out directly to, say, third-degree connections where there's 2 people. And the general research shows that there's not a huge response to that. Like, people will respond to you if you have something in common, like Barnard or used to work at the same place, or you know somebody. But the further down the chain of connection it goes, people are unlikely to respond to outreach. So that's one thing. When you are, though, very actively job searching and networking and sending out a lot of messages, it sometimes can be worth paying for a month, or actually, once you've been on LinkedIn for a while, they if your usage of LinkedIn pops up, they often will offer you a free month, and go for it. Take the free month, check out the features, and see if it's worth it to you. Just make sure you set that reminder to not automatically renew it on your credit card. So I think it's worth checking out, but overall, I think you can make a pretty good use of LinkedIn without having a paid account. So. Do recruiters look at your Facebook and or Twitter profiles? Is that something we should be aware of? Not routinely on the Facebook. They might do, I don't know if recruiters do that as much as sometimes the hiring manager might do a social media search sort of down the road. So it's definitely worth thinking about making sure that you're presenting yourself the way you want to. Especially on Twitter, it might be good to create a sort of either professional Twitter or a personal/professional Twitter. If you've been using Twitter or Instagram or any other social media platform primarily personally, you might want to tighten up the privacy settings as you can on that one, and then create a second profile that's more work-oriented and that you actually would want people to see. So I think that, I think that's generally a good approach. Is there a way we can have the slides you just showed? Yeah, absolutely. We will send you a copy of the slides, and then the recording will be posted as well. And either Alumni Relations or Beyond Barnard or both will be accessible to you. Great question. What is your opinion on going back to school now? So yeah, I had that slide in and then I took it out because I was trying to shorten things. There is a really typical thing that happens in recessions, which is a flight to graduate school. And I would say it's interesting just watching our team, we've had a lot of conversations with seniors and recent grads and others about graduate school. It's definitely a tick in numbers. If you are already thinking about graduate school, and if graduate school, as long as you give it some thought in terms of how does it fit into your long-term plans and what the return on your investment is going to be. And that's not only looking realistically at sort of time and money, but also doing some research, talking to both current students and graduates of programs you're considering and looking at where they ended up and how they felt the degree was useful to them, or even just talking to people in general about where you want to be and what are the best credentials and is it sort of worth it? Is there a strong return on investment? So you want to do a little bit of your research on graduate school and some thought, and we're happy to talk that through with you. But yeah, if you were thinking of doing graduate school anyway and you are out of work and going sooner rather than later makes sense for you, it can be helpful, you know. So yeah, it's a very individual decision, but it's definitely something. You specifically asked, will job searchers value a master's degree more than experience? 2019 college graduate with about a year of experience. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that happens is having a master's degree without a ton of experience can sometimes work against you in some particular positions in industries because you're more expensive as soon as you have the master's, and without a lot of experience to back that up, it might not be worth it to them. So you have to think about that. But that, again, tends to be sort of, it's good to work that through sort of on an individual basis and sort of doing some networking, going to some info sessions and sort of thinking about that. And again, we're happy to sort of talk that through with you on an individual level as well. If you're making a career transition, how do you present yourself in your LinkedIn profile? Yeah, that's always a tough, it's all about defining yourself, as you say, and the desired future self. The quick answer, and we will delve into this a little more when we get to the LinkedIn profile, is the key things are going to be your headline, sort of headline / title to a certain degree, and then the about section, and then some of the bullets you choose to share under the experience. So the general answer is that you are going to focus on the transferable skills that you bring to the situation, and also, you know, emphasizing if you've done any training or project work or volunteer work or side gig in the new area, you can there's definitely ways to feature that, and then also even within your profile, the bullets you choose to share, you could again share the less specific to the work you're doing now and the ones that apply more generally to the career you're interested in. But yeah, it's a little bit of a tricky decision, and especially if people aren't aware that you're thinking about a shift, you know, so it's trying to strike that balance between, you know, valuing and sort of representing well the work and experience you do have, but also signaling that shift to something new. But I think you can use both your headline if you're willing, and definitely your about section. And what often happens is when people are sort of early in the transition process, the first paragraph about can be about what you're currently doing, and the second paragraph could be towards what you're looking for. But then if you're more serious about making the shift, you can flip that and you can lead with, here's what I want to do, or here's what I'm doing to prepare for, and here's some experience I do have in this new area, and then giving a little bit and then using the second paragraph to talk a little bit more about your former thing. Another great question from a fellow class of '84. Do you think that as we are becoming more accustomed to working remotely, that it's an option to look for a job outside of your immediate physical location with the hope of working remotely? Yeah, I think that, I mean, with caution, you know, you need to, it's definitely worth applying for things that are as you say, sort of outside your immediate physical location. They're, you know, I think one of the big long-term impacts of COVID is going to be on attitudes about and realities of working remotely. I think that overall it'll be positive. You know, I think there's some negative, you know, people are still nervous about it and seeing some negatives to it, but I think remote work or partial remote work is going to be greatly expanded, continue to be expanded in the long term. And so, yeah, so I would definitely apply to things. And then if you get to as you get into the interview rounds, then you need to think strategically about when to talk about what's their current remote situation, what's their remote situation going to be going forward. And then even negotiating that if you could work remotely for a certain period of time, and then if you really liked the organization and the work, you might consider, you know, moving if that's a possibility. So yeah, I think that's kind of falls under that be flexible, you know, model of things. For those of us who graduated for some time, greater than 10 years ago, what are the resources you mentioned at Barnard or Columbia accessible to us? So Beyond Barnard is accessible, including everything we do: graduate school advising, career advising, fellowships, competitive fellowship advising, pre-health advising. That's all open to everybody. And then some of the things I mentioned, like the Empirical Reasoning Center, online resources are available. Alumni Relations obviously continues to put out a bunch of programs. The Athena Center puts out programs that are accessible. And then I think specifically Alumni Relations also has a listing on their page of like library access and things like that. And if you, I'm not sure, but I'll have to double check this, and I'll try and get back to you on it at our next session. But LinkedIn Learning is accessible through the Columbia Library System, but I'm not 100% sure that's true of alumni. So I'll raise that possibility, but I'll have to clarify if that's true. Great. Somebody else asks a great question. Are you going to cover the qualifications question? Women often won't apply if they don't meet every single qualification on a job listing. How do you evaluate that? Yeah, that's great. There's a fairly significant body of research that shows that women take themselves out of the running because they feel like they don't fit everything. So, and yeah, and so I would say generally, I talk about that with people a lot, that you want to, it's part of that being flexible, and it's also part of that being confident that if you read a job description and, you know, something about it is compelling to you, some part of the job, the company itself, the organization, even if you don't meet every requirement, if you feel like you can make a strong case for some of what they're looking for, then go for that. Customize your resume, customize your cover letter to highlight those things that they are looking for that are a good match for you. And then if you get to the interview phase, prepare. That's at the interview phase where they can challenge you on some of the things you might not have. You know, you want to be prepared for how to talk about that. You may not be completely up to speed on something they're looking for, or you might have had experience with something similar but not that exact thing, or you are a fast learner, or you've got, you know, proven ability to get up to speed quickly, you know, so there's a lot of ways around that down the road. But yeah, if there is a hard and fast qualification or requirement, then yeah, you don't apply for something that requires a master's and you don't have a master's. But in general, you want to err on the side of, yeah, I think I could do most of this. I think I could learn most of this. Let me go ahead and apply and sort of make the case. And we will look at that a little more closely when we talk about resumes and then cover letters. Yeah, great question. In-person networking, obviously not realistic. What advice do you have for effective networking when you can't people meet in person? Yeah, definitely. I think suggesting video chats is great. Good old-fashioned phone calls is great. And then another thing, just sort of networking in general. One thing I've seen really since March, just a huge uptick in free online gatherings and seminars and webinars, and even a lot of conferences that were scheduled for the spring and summer are being offered virtually at either a reduced price or for free. And I would take full advantage of that. I went to a part of a conference a couple weeks ago that I was not going to be able to go to in person because it was expensive and in San Francisco, but I went to the virtual version and they used Zoom and breakout rooms, and it was just the same, very much the same effect as a live conference would be, in that we were in the breakout room for 5 or 10 minutes. We chatted, we exchanged contact information, we connected to each other on LinkedIn afterwards. So I think a lot of those same features can be helpful. So keep your eye open for conferences that you might have gone to or might not have been able to go to, and see if they're being held virtually. Yeah, and then I think very often I would say, in person is great, but a lot of people over the recent years, as things have gotten busier and busier, are happier to talk for a few minutes on the phone. And then now, since we've all gotten so much more used to Zoom and virtual chatting, you could certainly suggest that as a venue as well. So, how do I look for a job without my current employer finding out? This precludes me from posting on LinkedIn, for instance. Yeah, this is a tricky thing. I mean, the answer is, in this day and age, you do have to be prepared for the contingency that they might find out. And you do have to think about how you're going to handle that. If they do find out and they ask you directly, like, what's your answer going to be? Are you going to be fully honest, partially honest, in terms of posting on LinkedIn, yeah, you're not going to want to shout out that you're currently seeking a job, or, but there are other subtler ways to signal an openness to jobs. And then, this is a tough one to answer, because some industries are very small, not even necessarily, but they're just very tight knit, and it's hard to do anything quietly. But other industries, you can definitely be applying and sort of networking without calling undue attention to yourself. And then we got some questions in advance about LinkedIn and privacy settings and things like that, which I don't want to go into now because it's complicated, but we will address that either in the session or through a one sheet to make sure you understand sort of how can you, especially initially, keep things a little bit locked down and then maybe open things back up, but you also can block. You have some control over what your LinkedIn network sees. So we can talk about some of the specifics of that as well. How do we access the Barnard career resources like Myers-Briggs and Handshake if we have an older alumni email? Yeah, so the key thing, I will send the directions on this. One of my great colleagues, Eric, put together an email with instructions on Handshake. The key thing is you do not have to sign up with an EDU email, even though Handshake says that. You have to look for the little button underneath that says sign up with your personal email or something along those lines. I'll send you the screenshot. But you absolutely are able to sign on as an alumna and create a profile using a personal email. And in fact, you should use a personal email, even if for some reason you do still have access to your Barnard email, or say you work or go to school at Columbia. Don't use, actually, and any university, don't use a university email to sign on to Barnard Handshake. Do it under a personal email address. And if you're having any trouble with that, email beyondbarnard@barnard.edu, and my colleague Eric or my other colleague Claire will get in touch with you and help you through that process. And if you want to do the Myers-Briggs and any of the career assessments, you would first sign up for a career exploration or career assessments appointment, and we would talk you through, we'd sort of get to know your general circumstance, and then we would send you the links and then do a follow-up appointment to go over them. So those are all accessed through us. How long is too long with your LinkedIn bio? I mean, I think aiming for a couple of concise paragraphs is great. I've seen longer, and one of the features on LinkedIn is that when people are scanning quickly, they'll only see the first 3 sentences, and they have to click for more. So it's okay to go a little bit longer. But yeah, I'd aim for sort of two paragraphs, not super long, and we're happy to sort of work through and help you edit that. Any advice for coping with ageism? I graduated Barnard quite a while ago, looking to do a significant career pivot from education to industry. Yeah, that's sort of 2 marks against you. Making a career transition is tough, especially in a competitive market, and especially on the open market, HR people, hiring managers tend to look at resumes a certain way. So networking is going to be the key to both of that. It's definitely, since you know, since I started this gig, you know, 10 to 11 years ago, it's become much more common to leave graduation dates off of your resume, and very often, if feasible, to leave the first few years of experience off. And so you can kind of shave 5 to 10 years off your age, or, you know, so that's definitely something people do. But in other circumstances, you have really good, significant experience from the beginning of when you graduated from college, and you want to sort of own that. So it's definitely, ageism is out there, but it's not universal. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's going to be about networking, and it could be doing project work, that sort of opportunities for people to see you in action, which will counter the stereotypes they might have, and then using networking opportunities to sort of get you in front of people, and have that chance for them to see the whole person, not just your age or not just your resume. So, but it's definitely an issue, and we're happy to delve into that further. For those of us in the middle space, 7 to 10 years of experience, how do we look for appropriate positions? Yeah, it's interesting. This person says, most positions seem to ask for 10 plus or 3 to 5. Women are less likely to have management experience. So how do we deal with management requirements, which are often requirements at this level? Hold on one sec. I'm just going to shut the door. Sorry, I've got a son home from school who's singing in the background, which is always lovely, but a little distracting. Yeah, so that middle thing is interesting, because you're kind of, if you apply for something 3 to 5, people will say you're overqualified, and if you apply 7 to 10, underqualified. I would say in general, you want to apply for those stretch positions, and it's just going to take, and it's also moving up to that management level. It's a longer job search. I've actually had quite a few former colleagues at Barnard, you know, sort of move on to higher level positions, but it just seems to take a while, and it definitely takes a fair amount of networking and sort of building that professional network, and specifically looking for a couple of key mentors who are a couple levels above you, you know, but not necessarily, you know, in your field, you know, to sort of give that advice and sort of keep giving you that boost, you know, of referrals and recommendations. So that can be helpful. And then on the actual management experience, I mean, I think you need to use your cover letter, use your interview to talk about the informal management that you have done. You know, you might not formally have a team, but most people who've worked for any period of time do have, you know, different forms of management, and you know, thinking about that, being thoughtful about what you've learned about working with people and moving projects along, and leading, you know, in variety, in both formal and informal ways, can be, you know, really helpful. And you know, you're looking for examples and stories of that. So keep doing that. We're way over time. I'm sure a number of people have dropped off. You're certainly welcome to stay for a few more minutes while I continue to answer questions. But if you have to go, these will all be recorded. Although I should ask Lacey if we have a time. Okay. Yeah, so Lacey, text me, let me know if there's an absolute hard stop on this. Otherwise, I'll keep going. And then remember, there are further sessions to ask questions at. So the future is obviously unknown. There may be a second wave in the fall. As a result, how long do you expect the freeze on hiring may last? Also worried that some employees may, yeah, this is the tough one. This has been driving me crazy the last couple of weeks when I watch the news, is sort of watching people get relaxed when I don't think we should really be fully relaxing. And it makes me worried that that by being relaxed, we're going to cause that second wave and make things worse for all of us. So I'm with you on that. I think that the freeze on hiring, it's interesting. I don't have a lot to back this up except a combination of anecdotal and just kind of my feeling from talking to a lot of friends and colleagues from across industries. Is there's the official freezes, and then there's just this kind of frozen moment where organizations and businesses might be doing okay, but they're just nervous about the future. So I think some of that could loosen up over the next couple of months, and then it's just going to kind of depend, as you say, on what happens in the fall. and there may well be, you know, a second wave, or furloughs might become layoffs. Furloughs might, you know, partial furloughs might become entire, you know, furloughs. It's tough. It's tough to call. I think that the key thing is, and this gets to the flexibility, you know, this might be, you know, if you've got, and I know with some of the benefits, if you are on unemployment benefits, the federal one's running out at the end of July unless they continue it. So one thing might be, you know, you may need to take something in the short term that is out, you know, beneath your typical professional level, or that's you're just going to do to bring in income. And again, that's fine to do in the short term in terms of the overall impact on your career and how your resume looks. You got to do what you got to do, and any job is worthwhile if it brings you money, and anything you learn there is going to be transferable to future things. So you might want to think about, in the face of all this uncertainty, think about, you know, what is out there short term, part time, project oriented, you know, something I used to do and don't do anymore, but, you know, could be marketable at the moment. You know, just sort of think about things that you could be doing in the interim, while you kind of ride out the uncertainty and see what happens as we, you know, go through the next few seasons. So some employers require knowledge of obscure computer programs and databases in addition to soft skills. Where can you learn about it? I always tell people, start with Google and see what you can find out about those obscure programs and databases. Even just sort of reading about it, doing some YouTube tutorials, you know, so you sort of get the language and get a little refresher on it. You don't need to go out and learn. If a company uses a specific database that you've not heard of, or that isn't that common, you don't need to on your own go out and be trained and ready to use that. You need to, there should be some expectation that they will teach you how to use it. And if they're not going to do that, that's I'd say a red flag against maybe not working for that company if you've got that luxury. But yeah, you want to, you know, start with Google and YouTube and figure out, you know, how common this is. Is there some basic stuff that can kind of just give you the language and understanding of the database? Then you can honestly say, I don't have direct work experience using that database. However, it seems very similar to database X or computer program X that I used in a former job. And, you know, I'm sure I'll get quickly up to speed. And what would be your training process on that? You know, sort of bounce it back to them and see what they say about what kind of support and training you would get. In my 50s, took off over a decade to raise a family in a city where I have never worked and have few contacts. Successful immigration attorney for many years, and now I'd like to work in criminal law. Any advice as to how to change specialties in this situation? Yeah, I mean, the thing about law is that there's a lot of professional networks, large and small, in law. So I would start with, in your new city, well, it's not necessarily a new city, you're just saying I guess it's new in the sense of you haven't worked there before. Take a look at, you know, what does the local bar association look for those general law, you know, not the, you know, well, I mean, you could start with the immigration attorneys, you know, connect with them because they're your people, and then find out from them who they know, you know, on the criminal law side, and sort of work the network that way. You could also look for general bar association, both local and online. You know, this would be a great time to look at any sort of webinars and seminars and things like that. Yeah, I would start, you know, law has a lot of professional organization. So I would sort of get yourself out there and see it as sort of, definitely look at it as informational networking first. You're gathering information, you're making connections, and then you can look more seriously at, like, how can I parlay that into making the shift? Good question. Can you sign up for more than one university handshake websites? This is a problem. It has been a problem in the past. So if you, for instance, used Handshake in your graduate program, it can be problematic to try and sign up for the new one. Let me check in with our handshake experts on our team and give you an update on that. I will either do that by email or in the next session, and find out, because I know we tackled this a couple of times with alumni who had been on Handshake through their graduate programs, and then were trying to join Barnard Handshake, and it was complicated. So let me check the sort of status on that and give you some follow-up on that. So, and I see, I'm also writing down your name so I know who asked that question. So great. Does Barnard have programs that facilitate matching of alumni, mentors, and mentees? Not yet. We are hoping to soon. We launched Barnard Connect last summer that connects students and alumni, and it's been really successful. And we would very much like to add on the package through Barnard Connect that's going to allow alumni to connect to each other. We, at the moment, don't have the budget for that, and things are going to be a little restricted budget-wise at Barnard, so I can't promise that it will be in the next year, but it's definitely something we would love to do. But then in the meantime, we do, we've got some, we've got some potential programming in the works that will allow you to connect to others in small groups, small working groups, and then definitely tips about using LinkedIn and using other resources to sort of locate people within the same industry. And there are, I should mention, there's on social media, some of them set up by the college and some of them set up by alumni independently of the college. So there's a couple of big Facebook groups for alums in general, and then a lot of subgroups. There's an alumni in tech and alumni in education, and a variety of subgroups on Facebook. Same is true of LinkedIn. So when we get to the LinkedIn networking, we'll definitely highlight some of those and let you know about that. Oh, excellent. Good. I'm glad. I'd like to add, there is a COVID hotline that is hiring contact tracers to call COVID patients. This may show employers that you took initiative during COVID to at least work and give back. Yeah, that's a great resource. They need a lot of them, and they're getting a lot of applications. So from my understanding from some people who have applied, is it's sort of relatively slow process, but it's a great opportunity. And I think, there are a lot of, COVID related, both volunteer and, hands-on work things that could, again, be a step to a different path for you, and be a slight, sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? A side track, but I think that, again, it makes sense. And if it gets you working and gets you producing and is something you can talk about in the bigger picture of what you did during COVID, I think it's really helpful. All right. Excellent. So I'm going to end it there. I'm late for my staff meeting, and we will continue this discussion in further sessions. And thank you all for joining and engaging and asking these great questions. And I'll see you again next week for those of you who can come back. And again, don't worry if you can't make next session. You're allowed to, throughout the series, drop into the ones that are most relevant to you. Take care, everybody.